From the dark recesses of my unconscious mind into the glaring light of objective reality. You are listening to the Dark Mind Podcast. Hello, everyone. Thank you for tuning in and joining me for another episode where we explore the boundless realm of dark literature and film. On today's show, we have a modern-day author that guides us into the past. From the mystery of the hot southern Mississippi Delta to the passion of dark romance, she takes us on a journey that begins with her writing process and ends with her plans for future works. So without further ado, join me as we delve into the dark insight of Brittany Johnson. Brittany, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Absolutely. Thank you for being here. I know you're busy promoting your new novelette, and from what I gather, a lot of other projects. So I appreciate you making the time.
Absolutely.
So in your bio on social media, one of the ways you describe yourself in kind of a tongue-in-cheek way is as a writer of a myriad of unfinished story ideas. So at some point, Mississippi Blue was one of those unfinished story ideas. What was it about Mississippi Blue that drew you to it and made you realize, I need to give birth to this? This needs to see the light of day.
Well, that's a great question. It's one of those that the seed was planted when I was in high school, in my history through film class. And we watched a film called Mississippi Burning. And that really just cemented this idea of like, I need to write something in this time period about a similar subject matter. And then it wasn't until several years later, so that would have been 2014, and then in 2018, Mississippi Blue in more or less a fuller form kind of came to me, and I went, oh, okay, this is actually, it's connected to this seed that was planted, and this is actually what it's going to look like. And so it kind of just came back to me. It wasn't necessarily one of those that I went, oh, I've been gnawing on this for a while. It was an idea that I had not thought of for many years, and then it came back, and I just was like, here we go. It's happening. It kind of found me again, more so than me going, oh, I should really get to this.
So do you have any classical training or have some sort of a creative writing background? I
do not.
So
yeah.
It's what I find about most authors that really put out good content is it's just kind of an inherent, like you're born a writer.
Yes. I mean, I can't speak for the experience that my writing of what it would have been had I had more of a background, but I do know that I have always been writing since I was young. And then just as I got a little bit older, and especially in high school, it definitely became more cemented in my mind that I was like, this is what I want to do. And so I hadn't ever stopped writing, but there was a certain point that I went, oh, okay, this is real now. This is something that I feel more than just like, oh, it's just a hobby. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I heard you talking about, I'm trying to remember, a time period beginning with, did you say 2016 or 2018? As far
as far as Mississippi Blue? Yeah, 2018. Yes, April of 2018. I always remember that because I like to go back and commemorate when I actually first started because it feels very, very official. This was my real first attempt in this way, especially on my typewriter and everything. It was such a different experience from what I'd done before.
And so I guess how long collectively did it take to write Mississippi Blue?
So I always say the overall. So I went from 2018 to when I self-published in 2020. So a couple years, but I wrote the first draft, everything, like I didn't edit or anything. It just first draft on my typewriter in about 4 months, and then had to go back and rewrite and add in scenes that weren't there and kind of, tie everything together that I didn't initially get out. And that took the remaining 2 years.
Are you structured in the sense that you write on a schedule? Like when you determined, all right, this book needs to get out there, I'm going to get cracking on this. Did you set up a deadline or a certain amount of words per day or anything like that?
So I went, especially since I was doing it more old school, I decided that I wanted to write half of what I heard Stephen King used to write on his typewriter, which was apparently like 6 pages a day. I don't know if that's entirely true, but that's what I heard. And so I went, okay, let's go 3 pages a day. Let's try half and see how that goes as my minimum. And so oftentimes, many of the days, it would be more than 3 pages, which was awesome to hit those like kind of writing streaks throughout the day. But then I always told myself, even if I didn't feel it that day or there's, work and everything else, I was tired at the end of the day, I said, at least get my 3 pages in. And so I would always do that. And then I had little sticky notes that I put on my desk, and I'd go, 3 out of 360 pages or whatever my end goal was page count wise. And then 6 out of whatever, 9 out of, or however many that I got in that day. So I kept track that way. Everything about it was very much like, it really just felt like me and the typewriter there, and nothing else existed outside of that. And that was the only way that I kept track. And it was very much like, if I do this and I stay on this kind of track, I will have a novel soon enough in some way. And again, it wasn't when I felt like I finished it in my first draft. I did have a beginning, a middle, and an end. And that beginning stayed the same to the finished product, and the end stayed the same in the finished product. And then a whole bunch of stuff, was added in the middle. Basically, that was where all the work ended up being. But yeah, it was, I had never written that way. I'd never experienced it that way. I'd never kind of just like dug in and kept myself really determined to meet whatever end point that I could find. I was just going to kind of write until it was done.
Absolutely. That's great. So you mentioned writing as a child. Do you remember about what age you started?
I feel like I was around 8 years old, and I still do have the original journal that I wrote in. And I wrote, to me, at that age, it was a book, and each page that I wrote was a chapter, and it had 10 chapters. So it was a little, just, now it probably wouldn't even be regarded as a short story. It'd be like, you know what I mean? It was so itsy bitsy, but I definitely had that like full plot throughout it. I once again had the beginning, middle, and end. So I started around then. It was totally just for fun. I was really into it. And then I remember this very distinctly because in 7th grade, middle school, my English class, we had an assignment for a murder mystery narrative, which I instantly latched onto. And now looking back, I can definitely see that initial influence, because that Mississippi Blue has this huge detective element in it. And so I really, really was so pleasantly surprised in my class how much I enjoyed it. I got so into it. And that for me kind of I felt myself getting the writing bug then.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't until then that I was like, oh, this is something that I really enjoy, instead of just being a kid and kind of, just doing your thing. And it's like art. But then now this time it's like, oh, this could be real art. This could be something I eventually do later on.
You mentioned detective mystery. Did you like the kind of hard-boiled noir detective stories? I mean, I never read any of those, which is funny. A lot of my influences come from movies and TV, from cinema. So, yeah. Yeah, I didn't really start reading until I was in my 20s, but I used to love watching Sherlock Holmes, the old Basil Rathbone English versions. What drew you to the very specific Southern Gothic genre?
Great question. I don't know what else to say aside from that has always deeply fascinated me. Again, I feel like for as much as I love to write it and how fascinated I am by it, I don't feel like I've read enough. I'm definitely catching up now, and exploring more authors who are just amazing in that genre. But I also feel like it's like I didn't know of that genre until later on. Before Mississippi Blue, I didn't really know that I was writing necessarily Southern Gothic, even as I was writing it. And then I just knew that I wanted to write something in the Deep South because that fascinated me. Again, through like cinema, movies, TV shows, there was definitely this like entrancing kind of mysticism, kind of like it feels secretive and hot and sultry. There's all of these things that I was like, that's what I want to write about. That's what intrigues me. And then I want that as my backdrop for a story to take place in. So slightly forgetting your question and maybe getting off topic, but
just what drew you to the Southern Gothic genre?
Just pure fascination for it. Yeah.
So have you seen season 1 of True Detective?
Absolutely.
Oh my God. Cause the description, the heat, the mystery, the darkness, that just, rust and coal was coming to mind when you were saying that. Yes.
And it's funny because, quite a few people have talked to me about season 1 and, like whether or not that influenced me, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, it definitely did. But I got to tell you, I was watching season 3 of True Detective nonstop while I was writing Mississippi Blue, especially in the tail end. There was something about it that really,
that one.
It's, I feel like if people watch season 2 and disliked it, it would be hard to go into season 3, but I would highly recommend.
That's kind of what happened to me.
Yes, I would highly recommend going into season 3. It's not season 1 by any means, but it definitely has, they're in Arkansas, there's missing kids. The 2 lead detectives have such a interesting bond and relationship. So it's like, it definitely harkens a little bit back to that season 1.
I'll have to check that out then.
Yeah.
So Seth's mother, Mrs. Barton, is an interesting character to me because she has borderline personality disorder and is extremely religious to a fault. Mm-hmm. And from what I've read, that's a very common occurrence with people with borderline personality disorder. They have such a fractured sense of self and don't know who they are that they find comfort in the structure of religion and usually take it to an extreme. Did her character come from any personal or indirect experience with someone with that disorder?
I mean, yes, but I feel like there's multiple sources oftentimes for one character, and you can draw these little bits into it and then create this own. So, I mean, like, so much of the characters, and specifically for me in Mississippi Blue, I'm sure a lot of authors, if not all, are like that because you're always drawing on experiences, and sometimes they come out without you knowing it. It's a very like unconscious thing you're writing, and then all of a sudden this comes through, and then you read it later and you're like, oh, holy shit, that's from this. That's so yes, and I would say many of my characters have like this book is very special to me in the sense that if I was to get personal with it, I could tell you, yeah, this is related to this is my experience with this, or experience within my family, something like that. So short answer, yes.
Right. Well, so how much of you, if any, is in the characters of Carolina and Rita?
Yeah, a lot, I would say. Rita is, and I've talked about this before because I've been so touched by feedback from people of how much they connect with Rita and how much they mean to her. And I'm just like, that is amazing. That is amazing to feel and hear and see that connection between people. And for me, it's even more special because Rita so much represents parts of me when I was younger, especially with writing, because she gets diminished. Her spirit gets diminished. She gets shut down about something that she just even begins to explore. And it gets shut down right away. And it's not even someone doing that to her in the present. It's her father's voice inside her head. And so she begins to write, and then she shuts herself down because of that voice in her head, because of what was put in there from such a young age. And so that's very true for me because there has been a lot of doubt for a long time. And to be able to express that through that character has just been so special and cathartic and everything else, it was a hard process, but it was like, I'm writing hard and true, and that's what I want to do and get to the real meat of it. And I'm like, this is emotional for me. It will likely be emotional for the readers. And from what I can tell, it is so far. And I just that's what I want to deliver every time. So definitely Rita is very near and dear to my heart. And she's also a lot like me. And then Carolina and a lot of me comes through in Carolina in terms of her strength during these hard situations that she's in and having to confront in that moment. And that's something that I always admire in characters when I see that, is to be able to go, oh my gosh, all of this stuff is happening all at once. It is about to take control over me. I can't do anything about it. And then they dig as deep as they possibly can, and they're able to fight through it, and that's one of my favorite things to see and to read about. So definitely Carolina and I share like that similarity, because that comes from me. That's what's in her.
Well, I really love the way you portray the character of the Thing. You don't give a complete description of the character at once. You give small glimpses of it through the perspective of different characters over time. So its appearance slowly takes shape in the reader's mind. Where did you get the inspiration for the Thing and its appearance?
Yes. So that actually originally started, and it was one of those like seeds that were planted like before, but this is a visual one. So I was playing MMO, an online game called The Secret World. And in that storyline, in whatever area, they have what's called a voracious Wendigo. And it was kind of their version of a Wendigo. And it very much actually resembles the Thing. I just altered some things, but it's not quite gangly. It was more of a thicker, bald, giant teeth beast that was just like hunkered down and crawling around. And so that really stuck with me when I saw it in the game. And again, like seed was planted, and then I went, oh, let me kind of exaggerate that or change it just a little bit, alter it to what I need for this creature. So like, the Thing has a little bit longer limbs and it looks more human-like rather than monster-like at some times. So it definitely, that idea though with the Wendigo did start some things off and get me rolling as far as what I wanted that creature to be or resemble.
So is it metaphorical in any way? The reason I ask is when it first appears in the story, it's taking the young girl immediately after her father has desegregated his church. So I wondered if it represented the collective hatred of the town from its long history of racism.
Yes. So the Thing definitely is the type of creature that's going to feed off of that hatred and almost be able to use it, and it will make it more powerful. I don't want to reveal too much because there will be a sequel coming at some point that explains more things. So I don't want to give too much away, but the Thing definitely has been around in Orson for a long time, and it's been using it and it's been feeding off of it within the blue and everything, and then coming up. So definitely just timing wise, the fact that all of these events start all at once and the town's really fired up about some things. It's going to make its appearance during episodes like this.
One of the things I noticed is the names of your characters. For some reason, it seems locale and time period appropriate. Did those just happen organically, or did you do some sort of research to come up with those names? They happen pretty organically. Some of the names, Judy Hastings, my grandmother's name is Judy. And so that was a little bit of because she's the one who my grandmother bought me my typewriter that I wrote Mississippi Blue on. So I wanted to have like a little bit of a reference to her, even in a subtle way. But yeah, I mean, these are all names that I like. Like I love the name Seth. I've always loved the name Seth. I think I've always thought it would be great to have a character with that name. Barton came from, there's a song by the band called The Civil Wars called Barton Hollow. So just like so many of these things were already kind of in my head subconsciously, and then they just came out when writing. And I don't know what to say. I love me some old school names in anything. I do. I really, really do. Just trying to think of other ones. I mean, they just kind of came out and they felt like they matched the characters. Dewey Lane was, that name seemed like such
the perfect name for that kind of character. Yeah. I don't know. It just, they came out and then I was like, well, they kind of fit. So.
Can you talk about the process of writing from different perspectives? Because, I mean, you run the gamut from male to female, different ethnicities, different ages.
Mm-hmm. Can I talk about like what that was like?
Yeah, like
or how I went about that?
Yeah, like how do you put yourself in the perspective of like how old was Rita? She was
she was about 17. Yeah.
And Samuel, I guess the same age.
Yep.
So you're writing from it, like with Samuel, you're writing from a different you're writing from a male perspective, different age and different ethnicity.
Yes.
It's like, that's quite a feat in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like a lot of that, I don't know exactly how to explain it because it just kind of started coming out. And I felt like I knew, once I started writing about these characters, I felt like I knew them so well and so intimately. Like each one of them, even though I didn't flesh them out on paper, they were fleshed out in my mind. And each one of them has their own distinct voice, I feel like. And it was so strong in my head that I almost couldn't not write it. Like I wasn't thinking about how do I write them or how, it was just coming out. And so I kind of just went with it. And, the process of when I was writing I wasn't super planned out with it. I didn't outline and nothing like that. I just went, okay, I'm going to write this scene today. And then I would skip around. I'm going to write this scene about this person. And oftentimes I just have like a single line running through my head that I start with, and then I put that down on paper and then I just keep going after that. And oftentimes it's in their voices. So, many of like the opening chapters that start off with different characters and everything are just, most of the time, those are the first lines that were in my head, or those opening lines in those chapters. So, just reading a lot of the books that I read in high school definitely gave me some background of how to write possibly these different characters with different voices and their own backgrounds and everything. So, I mean, like reading always is probably the number one thing that will help you figure that out. I feel like getting experience from other authors and how they present.
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny. I'm kind of a real, technical detail oriented person. So my natural inclination when I talk to authors is to ask them like, what is your technical process? How do you, but honestly,
Sure.
When it comes to art, art speaks to the subconscious and it comes from the subconscious. There are people like Bret Easton Ellis who sound like they're very technical. Like he outlines to high holy hell from the interviews I've seen with him. As far as you mentioned, having the mile markers of the beginning, middle, and end. Are there any mileposts in between there? Do you outline it all in any way?
I mean, I didn't with Blue, and I have not continued to do that with my other stories. I used to try to do that when I was younger, when kind of you're in school and they teach you like, oh, this is how you kind of figure out a story to write or a narrative or whatever. And so I'd always attempt to do that, but then I'm like, this just doesn't work for me. I kind of have it sitting all up here and I'm halfway existing in that world at all times during I remember I used to be at work and I would go, oh, I got an idea right now and I can't go write it down. Oh my gosh. Like, I was like, I can't help it. Like I was slowly planning out like, okay, this is what I'm going to write about tonight when I get home and sit down on my typewriter. This is the scene that I'm going to tackle. And not being able to get to that right at that moment, you feel like, oh no, I'm going to lose everything. It's just so, I mean, I'm sure that there are plenty of pros to outlining, but I feel like that for me, at least in my own personal experience, that takes away from the, almost the, like how genuine that moment is when you're actually writing. Cause I love just like being in it and letting it just come from me without knowing where it's going or what's happening, but just like writing that scene from as deep of a place as I possibly can. So a lot of that happened with Mississippi Blue, where it was just like, I have an idea for this scene. Okay, let's sit down, let's write it, let's get it all out. And then later, let's see what we can do with it. We can change it later.
So this one, I feel like I know the answer to already, because surely the answer is yes, but maybe not. Do you live or have you lived in the South? Because your description of the oppressive summer heat and humidity is spot on.
No.
Are you serious?
Yep.
Okay, you are officially the most talented writer I've ever met then, because I live in the deep South. And when I read your descriptions in this book of, I forget who it was, somebody was wearing a summer dress and the sweat was just pouring down their cleavage, and Seth was wiping the sweat from his brow and talking about blackheads on their face. And it's just like, oh God. And it was authentic to me. So it surprises me. You are evidently a very talented writer indeed, if you can describe those scenes that way.
Well, thank you so much. So I was born and raised in Oregon, and I lived there my entire life up until recently. And I'm in Oklahoma now, and I have family from here, which I visited. So I know technically, like, yes, in the South, but I'm more like Midwest, like closer to the Midwest than I am closer to the South. You know what I mean? So I feel like, here we have the humidity. And so I've always loved that. I mean, a lot of people probably don't like being all sweaty all the time, but I love that heat. But it's not.
I don't know. If you come over to where I live, you may change your mind.
Exactly. That's why I'm like, yeah, if I get a little bit further, which I do at some point. I mean, like, I absolutely want to make my way through, Mississippi and Louisiana, Georgia. I mean, like, that would be amazing to kind of do a whole little road trip loop. But yeah, so when I was writing Mississippi Blue, I was writing from Portland, Oregon.
Awesome. So. Wow. I am impressed.
Thank you. I am super glad to hear that it felt accurate.
Yeah.
And true.
Yes,
so
very
that makes
authentic.
me very, very happy. Good.
So you also have what I can only describe as a visceral descriptive power when painting a picture of a setting. Actually, if you're not opposed to it, I can give you an example by reading a passage.
Oh, sure.
Listeners, I have permission from the author, no copyright infringement. This is Carolina we're talking about here. She arrived in what resembled a dark womb, void of moisture and warmth or any sensation noticeable to man. Unreality smothered her, her brain commanding her body to twist and contort, a body which she could not truly feel. She saw her arms move slowly as if through clay. Carolina could not see through the dark purple cloud around her. She had no idea that just 10 feet below her was ground and the well from which she came. She continued to swim with beating limbs in her bubble of nothing. It strangely occurred to her through all of her fighting and animalistic thoughts that this must have been how astronauts felt if they lost themselves out in space. Something about astronauts and her memory of reading about them in the paper broke the limbo and sucked her lingering, wispy self right back into her limbs. The sack spit her out like a bursting blister, evacuating her body like a newborn exiting its mother's canal. She landed on her side next to the well. Mic drop. That is such a viscerally descriptive setting. We've talked about you just kind of get these rushes of inspiration, but once you get the inspiration, how do these, I can't describe them any other way, these visceral feelings and descriptions, like what's it like being in the throes of that, trying to use obviously it's Southern Gothic literature, so you're not using fairies and flowers to describe settings, but I mean, you really get into the thick of it.
Absolutely. And thank you so much. Yeah, I've noticed more when I'm writing, I feed off of that when I find those words and I latch onto them that really just like kind of grab you with these claws. And I feel that while I'm writing. I mean, like I'm one of those people that when they're writing, I'm like almost acting it out. I'm like, I feel like I'm feeling it. And so once I latch onto like one of those words, because I mean, just in what you read, it is like a string of kind of descriptions like that. And I feel like it almost doesn't let me go until I finish it out. But I'm always searching for like, okay, what's the next piece that's going to fit with that? What's the next word that's going to keep this going to just like really churn you while you're reading? And so for me, just having that experience, if I know I'm having that experience while writing it, I feel like it will hopefully come across the way that I want it to. And I just, I know, again, I go back to when I am watching certain shows and there's some scenes that are just making me like feel that way, I go, okay, I need to be able to write that. I'm always challenging myself of like, when I see something visually and it's coming across and making me feel a certain way, I go, okay, how can I write that? How can I describe that exactly? And so a lot of my writing comes from trying to describe something that I saw, like something that's just, like you said, so visceral and present and real. And yeah, so like if I'm cringing, hopefully you guys are cringing too, is kind of how I go about it. Yeah.
Absolutely. So tell me about this 70-year-old gentleman named Roland.
Oh, yes. My number one.
Yeah, the most important man in your life.
Yes, exactly. So yeah, he was a gift from my grandmother when I hadn't used him for a while. I can't remember my exact timeline, but you know, she gave him to me because she knew I was super into writing. She has always been very supportive. So it was a birthday gift, and I thought it was the coolest thing. And then I was completely afraid to touch it. I was so afraid to like mess it up or write the wrong thing. Like I'd kind of got in my head about it for a little bit, so I didn't touch him for a really long time.
It was in pretty cherry condition?
Yeah. Yeah. Really, really well kept. Like it came to me completely maintained and ready to go. Like she took it to a shop and made sure it was all good to go. She bought me my, ribbon for it. They had already, basically installed it in there. I have since learned how to do that myself, which is good. But yeah, so he sat around for a little while, not doing anything, being pretty unloved and underappreciated. Then when I wrote my first official page of Mississippi Blue on him, it just started after that. Like I couldn't stop. And there was something so magical, like truly magical for me about writing on the typewriter. The sound of the keys, the plunk, plunk, plunks, kind of like Rita talks about, that was very special for me. And it made my writing flow in a way that I've never had before. Something came out of me. I feel like because I was writing a story set in 1969 and I have this old badass typewriter, like something came together there that I didn't even expect. I didn't know that would happen. So yeah, Roland is that's really the only way that I write now. Certainly the only way that I will write novels now.
Yeah, I bet it was like Roland was like this conduit to a different time period.
Exactly. Yeah.
You briefly described how different it is from digital versus ink and paper. And it seems like a lot of authors prefer that. Like Cormac McCarthy used an old Olivetti typewriter. Chuck Palahniuk, actually, I think he just uses pen and paper.
Which is quite a feat as well. I can't imagine doing an entire novel on pen and paper. My hand would get very tired. Definitely.
So what is your writing atmosphere? I imagine you have a designated place and are not taking Roland to the local Starbucks.
I'm not.
Although you should, and you should video it.
Noise level would just, because he is loud.
That's what I'm saying. Go in there surrounded by college students with their AirPods in, quietly typing on a laptop and just start hammering away.
I'll just look like the most self-important person in the world right there. Yeah. So I have like it's my desk, but I call it my writing desk because that's always where I do my writing. I have taken Roland outside a little bit during the summer because I wrote Mississippi Blue during spring and summertime. So sometimes I would take him out there and kind of just experience that. But then I was really worried that it would hurt it somehow. I did not want to damage it at all. So I took him back inside. So I have just I'm sit down with him at my desk, and I have my stack of paper, my blank paper on one side and then my written papers on the other. And I just kind of go through that process. It's pretty simple in that way, as far as I don't need a whole lot to do what I do. It feels like with Roland, it's kind of just like me and him against the world, we just get in and get to work. And then I listened to a lot of music when I was writing Mississippi Blue. Like I have an actual released playlist that people can listen to if they want to, that I feel like is a soundtrack to the book. But almost all of the songs on that are songs that I listened to during many of the scenes when I was writing. And oftentimes, like I remember when I was writing all the Mark Hastings scenes, I had God's Gonna Cut You Down by Johnny Cash playing on repeat over and over and over again whenever I would write his scenes, because that just I'm like, that's his song. That's his mission. So, I would have my music on, I'd have my typewriter, and then I'd try and kind of just get into it. That's all that I seem to need.
Yeah. It's probably a lot harder to get distracted with Roland because he doesn't have an internet browser. So.
Which is why I also need to set my phone away from me.
Oh yeah, I'm forgetting about the phone. Yeah.
But I mean, at the same time, especially writing something that is historical fiction in a certain way, I did feel the need to like check myself. But I try to just, when I write, I try to just write without checking those things, even though internally I'm like, but is this actually accurate for the time? Like, I can't think of something. But, I had to go through and check and make sure that I didn't have anything that actually wouldn't be in 1969. But I did that later. Because when you're writing, you're like, you don't want to get bogged down by those kinds of things. You don't want to interrupt your flow by like questioning if something is accurate in that way or not. You can just edit it later.
Mm-hmm. Well, speaking of editing, one of the questions I like to ask authors is if they have any strange writing or editing tricks. Like one guy said that he uses his computer's dictation software to he'll do a few pages and then he'll have the dictation software read it back to him. And being able to hear that, he can tell if it's clunky or sentence structure is bad, stuff like that. When you wrote with Roland, but then you wrote it again on a laptop, right?
Yes. Yeah, I basically rewrote everything, which, to answer your question, that probably would be the one thing that I have editing wise that I feel is different, because that's when I did my editing and my revisions and my rewrites.
That's what I was going to ask. As you're writing. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. And that really helped me see it in a different way, because I'm putting it in there and I go, okay, no, that doesn't work right here. I want to cut that out and then replace it with this, or so that just all kind of happened at once, which was, for me, that process works really well. I've had people tell me that I'm totally crazy for doing that, which is fine, because I get it, because it'd be a ton of work, and it was, but for me it worked, and it helped me polish it in a way that I don't know if I would have, like printing it out and then going through with red ink and fixing it all like that and then retyping it. I'm not sure. I don't know if this was like just for this worked that way, or if, I don't know, but it all seemed to come together pretty well, I hope.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I remember reading, I think back in the day when everything was done on mechanical typewriter and you sent off a stack of paper as a manuscript to a publisher, I think you weren't allowed to have more than 10 errors a page. Was that it?
I think so.
Or excuse me,
yeah.
10 corrections. Like if you,
yes.
Yeah. After that, you got to redo the page.
That would be intense.
Yeah.
Yeah. I am thankful for, not having to do that, because goodness, I know that I had some errors. It's not like I was an amazing typist on my typewriter either, because I had to get used to it, so there's definitely, it's full of little errors and things. So thank goodness I was able to fix that on the computer.
So how much, I don't even know what you call the, is it ribbon, I guess, that you put in Roland? How much of those disposable supplies do you have to go through to make it through an entire novel?
I actually only used one, which has like the 2 sets with it. So it's like 2 sets of ribbon, and once one runs out, it alternates to the other one. So I only used one for Mississippi Blue, but again, it's not the same length that I had for the final finished product. So I'm not sure if I would have had to use more, but actually, it lasts for a while, especially if you're not pressing super hard on the keys and you're going a little bit lighter and you have the right settings on your typewriter. You can actually make it last quite a while, which is nice too. So I've only gone through, I think, 2 sets overall for everything I've written on Roland. So it's not too bad.
So tell me about Maneater. You've
Ooh,
got
yes.
the new novelette out. Without further ado.
Yes. So Maneater it's a little bit of a deviation from Mississippi Blue. It's not set in the South, so it doesn't have that kind of voice or vibe to it, but it definitely still, I feel like if people read Blue and Maneater, they'd go, oh, this is the same author. So I think my writing voice carries through. It's also set in the late 1950s. So it has, those are the eras that I like to write in. And it is definitely a dark romance novel, I would say. I think it just got described in a recent review as supernatural erotica, and I was like,
nice.
"Oh, okay, I will accept. Thank you." So yeah, I mean that was an older project that I didn't think that I was going to bring it back to life, but then I did through some awesome beta readers. They really helped me get it to the place that it's at now, and I'm very happy that it's my second release. I wrote the entire thing on Roland as well. It's quite shorter, but it's basically about a young girl. She's 27. She is a virgin. She hasn't had a lot of experience with socially, but also dating and intimately, and there's definitely a reason for that. I don't want to give too much away because it's a shorter story, but there is a supernatural and quite dangerous reason that she hasn't gotten involved with people. And so she meets this person that seems like this is going to be it. And then their journey takes some definite twists and turns after that. So yeah, but it was a lot of fun to write, a little bit outside of my wheelhouse, but a lot of fun too.
Well, what was it that struck you, like your inspiration from going to, I guess, kind of the traditional Southern Gothic hard-boiled detective novel to the dark romance?
I just really, I think it was the characters. I really, really like my two lead characters, Betty and Richard. And I definitely have, this is almost like a prelude, like an origin story to some of their adventures later on that would get quite a bit darker and fit more into potentially that Southern Gothic realm. So this is definitely a little bit of it's a quick setup to that and some plans that I have for later on. So it was a good deviation because it also challenged me just to mix it up outside of my normal thing, which I think is good to do. But at the same time, it's like, I have some plans for you guys later on and for my worlds to intersect a little bit. So I'm excited for that.
So I guess readers can take comfort in from what I hear that not only with Mississippi Blue, but with Maneater, there's a continuation for both.
Absolutely. Yes. I cannot give any details of when, but yes, you will be getting more of both in some way.
So what was it like to go from writing the romance of Seth and Carolina, which was more of an ancillary part of the story to Mississippi Blue, to writing what I imagine is a more intense, sexually charged primary part of a story?
It was an interesting flip because to make that the main part of the story is, I feel like, a challenge without it coming across as like fan fiction, maybe like doing it well. You know what I mean? So it doesn't feel like, oh, it's just about sex or it's just about this. And that's like, because I wanted there to be an actual story with it, but then have this very charged, electrifying, thing happening between the two lead characters. That's very real, their connection and everything with Betty and Richard. And then but that's the same with Carolina and Seth, because I felt very strongly about their romance, even though it was such a, on the list of priorities, it was quite a bit lower than the other events happening in it, but I wanted it to feel just as real. So, I mean, that's the same between Carolina and Seth as it is between Betty and Richard, is that I wanted to make their connection as real as possible. And whether or not it's how that's portrayed in two different ways in each book, but just really having it feel authentic was my main goal.
So you already kind of spoke about it before with regard to music, and I've noticed a few of the authors that I've come across, I think definitely Monica Vogel, pretty sure Braden Riddick, and some others, they all have soundtracks for their novels. So do the particular songs inspire you to write the particular scenes, or do the scenes kind of just bring the songs to your mind? Did the chicken come before the egg?
Yes. The songs inspired me to write the scenes. If I didn't already have them, or they added to, I was already in the scene and I was listening to it. And then, like I said, if a certain song struck me and I wanted to just stay in it, I would just put it on repeat and just over and over. And even if it's a lyrical and not just instrumental song, it just kind of goes in the background and is just there, like looping, and it kind of just keeps me with this momentum and in the moment of it. But yeah, definitely I'm that type of writer who will listen to something or have something on and I'm like, oh, I need to write this scene now. This like evokes this kind of emotion and now I need to put it on a page. So definitely for Mississippi Blue, that was so many of those songs. I mean, there's even songs that like because I was listening to them, there's Can't Help Falling in Love by Elvis Presley, which is like Seth and Carolina's song, essentially. I was listening to that song for them, and then I put it into the book, like having that play on the jukebox and they were leaving, because I had been listening to it, you know? So certain things find their way in there, and then just like having that soundtrack made it feel so much more real to me, I guess, while I was writing. I was like, oh, I can hear these songs being played as if this was a movie right now, you know? So it added that little bit of depth to it as well.
So what do you think about the future of novels? Do you think that large publishing houses will remain in business, or do you think that as self-publishing becomes more affordable, that people will eventually get sick of not being able to have full creative control over their content and everything will just kind of go independent?
That's an interesting question, and a hard question to answer because I really don't know. I'm very new to kind of this indie publishing world. You know I released my book like 2 years ago, but I didn't fully start getting involved until really when I republished Mississippi Blue in paperback, which absolutely changed the game for it back in October. So I feel like publishing houses are probably going to stick around for a while. Mm-hmm. Still, they're pretty cemented into... Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, have you ever queried anything to a major publisher?
I did. So I never talk about it, but I did have a novel before Mississippi Blue that I finished. But it was, I did it in high school, and it's just so different from my writing level now, and where I feel like sometimes I can go through and I see like hints of like, oh, that's like, yeah, that little line is me later writing. But, so I did actually query that, and I got, to like an indie publisher that was local to where I was living at the time, and they wanted the full manuscript after reading the first 10 pages, and then they decided not to after they got through. So I was like so close, and then like, oh no. But it's totally fine because everything worked out. And honestly, when I got that rejection, I was like, I'm part of the club now. Like, I did it. I'm like, it made me feel more official, which is me being the optimist that I am, trying to like find the silver lining and everything. But yeah, so that was my only experience with that. So I've never queried to a big publishing house or a bigger agency or anything like that. So I don't have direct experience with that. And it sounds like you're waiting a lot of the time. Once you do that, you're waiting for a response. And that's part of why I went self-publishing, was because I was like, I feel done with Mississippi Blue. I feel good about it. I don't want to wait for that. I felt like I couldn't almost. So
yeah, and if you go through the writer's market, I guess they still have those. I took a writer's workshop a long time ago, probably 20 years ago. But when you look through the different publishers, a lot of them will say, do not accept multiple submissions. So if you submit to them, that's the only place you submit, which is kind of, it's just one of those constraints that really kind of would make me think that an author would just rather, go independent, unless they were looking for that payday of the advance, because I know the advances are usually monstrous, and usually the book doesn't sell near as much as the actual advance is.
Right. Yes, that is definitely one of those bigger trade-offs, and probably a huge appeal to trying to go the traditionally published route. I mean, like, I always, when I was younger and started really thinking that this is what I wanted to do, I was like, well, I used to have that thought of, I won't be considered or couldn't consider myself a real published author unless it was traditionally published, which I've completely like 180'd on that and feel so differently, especially now being in the indie community and like finding self-published or small indie press published books that I'm like, they're so good. They're so much better than a lot of the traditional stuff that I read. And not not to say, I mean, there's great books out there everywhere, but I'm like, some of these lesser known books, they're just so good. And I'm like, I would have never known had I not gotten into this and involved in this. I feel like it's so rich with so many great writers that don't have that that same kind of spotlight just because they weren't traditionally published.
So whenever I get books, I mean, I'm pretty much a slave to Amazon. So, but every once in a while I'll go to a brick and mortar Barnes and Noble or something like that. But are there indie bookstores or bookstores that sell indie books? Because I think I've seen pictures that you've posted where it looks like you've, kind of like an author on a book tour talking about your book, signing books and so on.
Yeah. I'm pretty sure, and don't quote me on this, but I'm pretty sure that there are indie bookstores, and I just don't know where they are. I haven't found any locally, but I do know, I have one that's near my town. They have all the mainstream books there, but they're like just a smaller bookshop, so I think they're considered indie bookstore, but it's not like they just exclusively sell indie books in their store, if that makes sense. But I was lucky enough to have 3 different book signings in the towns nearest to me. And then at one of those, they bought 3 of my books, so they were up on the shelf. So that was what you were referring to. So that was pretty wild. I was just like, this is amazing right now, because I've been picturing that for so long, and now it's up there, and I'm like, oh my gosh, it's right next to a Stephen King book. That's crazy. Yeah. So
that's awesome. So, I saw somewhere that you write poetry as well.
I do. Yes.
Is that just like something you do in the background, or do we expect poetry in the near future?
I have a very supportive and close friend of mine who has been telling me I need to put together a horror poetry collection and put it out there, because I've gotten some good responses with that, but it's mostly just, at this point for me, it's just been a side expression. I used to, I'll be totally honest, I used to hate writing poetry. It was so uncomfortable and difficult for me until I realized that you don't have to have a lot of rules with it. And then once, I felt very liberated by that. And so then I just wrote whatever I want with poetry, and that actually was a way for me to expand and improve my my prose, was through poetry, because I feel like it freed me up to do what I wanted to be, like a little experimental and sentence structures and stuff like that within my book and within my prose. So poetry is it's a lot of fun, and I really enjoy it. And I don't know if I will ever officially do something with it, but it definitely carries big influence for me within writing itself.
Yeah, I was always a fan. I don't know if I should say this out loud, but I was always a fan of Bukowski. Something about a dirty old man writing poetry just seems awesome to me.
Absolutely.
Well, what about short stories?
I'm just not very good at them. Admittedly.
I figured it'd be the other way around. You're not very good at, you're good at short stories, but not very good at novels, but it's the shorter stuff you have a problem with?
Yeah, I do. I love to drag it out. I love to be super descriptive. I love to get into it. Mississippi, I had to cut several scenes of Mississippi Blue, so it could have been longer, but I've definitely written several short stories, and I'm going to be releasing some more this fall, on Kindle or digital format. But I feel too constrained by that. I need plenty of room to breathe, and I don't like the idea of this happens, and then it's over. I need all of the juicy bits in between, and that's my favorite part to write. Is just to not, sometimes, and I love Stephen King. I am a huge fan, but sometimes I'm like, oh my gosh, what am I reading right now? Because this description is going on so long. I don't know what we're talking about anymore. And there's a certain part of me that loves that, but I was like, okay, I want to do that, but just pull it in just a little bit.
I don't care that he's wearing corduroy pants.
But yeah, well, because Maneater is a novelette. So that was like a good in between those two things.
So, and I also heard about screenplays.
Yes. I mean, nothing is, I've written a couple, but they haven't gone anywhere. I have a lot of stuff like that has been written, but it just has been sitting in my desk drawer or on my computer. So yeah, but, I really, that is something that in the future I would love to continue with. Like if I, ever got the opportunity to adapt or co-adapt or whatever Mississippi Blue into a, like a feature or a TV script, I would love that.
So I imagine that writing a novel, short story, poetry, different, but kind of in the same ballpark. I've seen a diagram of what a screenplay looks like. How different is that? That just seems kind of strange, the way you have to segment. It's almost like an outline. It's like a novel in an outline.
Yes, it's and again, I don't have a ton of experience. I'm by no means an expert at all. But it does, you kind of have to switch your brain into a different gear for it. Just with how it's written and how it's paced, not only just like the formatting of it itself, you know, and how the dialogue is and everything. But you got to switch gears into this, like, almost this action mode instead of, like, for me, when I'm writing prose, I have a much more kind of laid back approach that kind of warms into action and then really picks up and then lays back. And like my experience so far with writing the screenplays, and the biggest challenge for me has just been, it's been just getting into it and writing it as if it's happening in the moment, rather than like, I'm going to be able to take my time and stretch all of this out. And also conveying something in such a short amount of words. You know, he glanced at her, blah, 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 like, and then dialogue and, you know, instead of being like, he glanced at her and then she felt the ripple of, you know, I don't know. It's just like, it's such a different experience, but it's really fun too. I have fun challenging myself to do different things and write in different ways, because I feel like it all feeds together and it helps improve the areas that I might be weaker in other parts of my writing. That's why I said earlier with poetry, it's like, oh yeah, that helped me figure out how to write better prose because I could be a little bit more free with it. With writing screenplays, I'm able to break out of kind of a certain monotony that I get into of like, this is how things are described and this is the order of it. And instead I can be like, boom, action, here we go. And I need less words and it will still convey a lot. So it's an interesting process, but I think it's a lot of fun too.
Yeah, it seems like with a screenplay, your words are kind of the framework that the visual experience of the movie kind of fills in. Like, instead of describing every little thing or every thought process, you've got to realize, okay, they're going to be zoomed in on the face of the actor or actress, and that's going to be conveying how they feel. Their appearance is going to be right there for you to see, so you don't have to describe what they're wearing. And
yes, and they can, you know, you don't have to do that kind of work because that's their job. The actor or actress or, you know, director even of assisting with that. And so you're able to just, if you write it well, they're able to take it and run with it, is my understanding, which would be just when I was writing Mississippi Blue, I saw it so vividly, and I imagined it as a movie or a TV show. And I've always been jealous of being able to, like in cinema, being able to set up a scene and get an entire vibe by just, you know, one, you know, like an intro scene. Like instead, for example, in Mississippi Blue, if they just like entered on a swamp with, you know, all of the sounds, the cicadas, the maybe some dialogue coming through of narrative, like it's describing so much already, where on my end, the work to describe that, if I wanted to be like in real detail, is so much more. So I've always been like a little bit like, man, that'd be super cool. But I also love what I do. I love getting really deep with the descriptions as well. But it would just be awesome to just be able to like, bam, there it is. Description. You know, you feel it. The atmosphere is there.
So you had mentioned that the reference to the movie Rear Window was personal to you because it was your mom, correct?
Yes.
Your mom kind of introduced you to it, I guess, to Hitchcock in general?
Yeah. Let's see. I Rear Window, and then Psycho, and a little bit of The Birds I've seen, but I haven't seen all of his work. But yeah, Rear Window really stuck with me, and I wanted to put that in because it's one of those movies that was so suspenseful, and I absolutely love the suspense, and that's what I was trying to convey in a lot of the book, was to feel that. So when Rita's like kind of going through and going, oh, we need a character that feels like this, and he's kind of trapped here but knows what's going on, and so it was almost symbolic of like what I was trying to do in Mississippi Blue in some scenes of like what happened in Rear Window. So yeah, that was definitely a big influence, and I liked having that as a little shout out in there too, because my mom has been like my number one supporter this entire time. And, you know, she was also the one who was like, let me watch the Stephen King's It, the 1990 version. And
How
so
old
that
were you?
like that, I was like 6.
Oh my God. See, that would have been the end of me if I had seen that when I was 6.
I know. I'm like, I probably shouldn't admit that. And I'm like, I'm sorry, Mom. But it really began my like obsession with horror. I truly feel like. So yeah, because I was so scared, but I was like, I couldn't not watch.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we were at some sort of a museum, and I guess I was probably around 6, something like that. And we watched, they had a screening of The Birds in 3D. Like,
oh my gosh. Yeah.
It was intense. It's like, make them go away. It's horrible.
There's some images in your mind that just like, they're never going to go away. It's just cemented in there.
Oh God. So what is the life of Brittany like outside of writing?
It's not very exciting. Because that's I've been really, really focused on this and really trying to, like actually give it a shot. And I had huge changes, and huge life changes after the pandemic happened, as I'm sure so many people have gone through. I'm not going to get into specifics or anything, but life kind of took a huge 180, and I've really felt like writing has been something that's been getting me through that, and trying to I'm in the middle of figuring out my life right now and how it works alongside with doing what I dream, which is what I'm doing right now. And it has been amazing. And so yeah, it's not a lot outside of me working and writing. I love to game. I love MMOs. I love Lord of the Rings. I've been super into that lately. Just getting lost in other worlds. Reading, obviously. You got to keep reading to keep your writing, up too. I used to work out a ton. I don't really anymore. I used to be a kickboxer and martial artist. I don't do that as much anymore. But yeah. Yeah,
I saw something that I thought was the Tough Mudder, but I think it's actually called the Spartan Sprint that you had posted up.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, I've done a couple of those. I would love to do them again someday. So yeah, I definitely still have a very active heart within me, but I have not done as much of that as I used to. That used to be like my whole life was, from a young age. So, like I said, truly like a 180 into this other realm. But I was writing during all of that. It just is now kind of the main focus.
Well, as we kind of bring the show to a close, one thing I wanted to ask, if there's one thing that you would like readers to take away from Mississippi Blue, what would that be?
One thing that I'd like them to take away is, for me, it would be the heart of it. Because I feel like there are a lot of very tender, meaningful moments throughout it. I mean, every reader is different, and everyone's going to have their own experience with it, which I think is incredible. But for me, like, there's a lot of talk about trauma and grief and sorrow and all of these, like, very deep, difficult things to deal with. But if they can take from that, like, that it's going to be okay. Like, these characters confront these things and they get through it in whatever way they can. Like, that would be the one thing, even though all this horrible stuff is happening, but I don't want to spoil in case anyone hasn't read it who's listening, but I feel that the ending wraps up some things and gets you to a point that it's like, oh, okay, after all of this hardship. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Well, in closing, is there anything you'd like to plug? I mean, you've got enough to keep people busy. You got Mississippi Blue. You just released Maneater. Anything you want to plug or social media?
Yeah, so my work is at this point exclusively on Amazon, so you can find both Mississippi Blue and Maneater on Amazon, Kindle and paperback versions of both. And then just as a little teaser, you will be seeing a Maneater audiobook narrated by me coming out very soon.
Nice.
So yeah, Mississippi Blue audiobook will take a little bit longer, but a Maneater one is definitely coming out in the near future. So that will be exciting. And I'm going to be continuing to release some short stories through Amazon, as I mentioned earlier. So you definitely have some more to look for. And second novel is underway 100%. So that I don't have a date that I can reveal for that, but I am very excited to introduce you guys into that, because that is definitely in a similar vein as Mississippi Blue. So that will be a lot of fun.
Well, we all look forward to it.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for being here. I really enjoyed it, and I wish you continued success with your writing in all areas of your life.
Thank you so much.
And thank you to everyone that tuned in. All links are in the description. And if you want to support the work of Brittany and the indie writing community, make sure to leave a review on Amazon. This is not only a positive reflection for the author, but the more reviews the author gets, the more visible they become in the search results when customers type in keywords. Stay healthy, stay sane, and as always, thank you for listening. See you next time.